Digital Wellness Weekly Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Christian Dominique. Christian, how are you doing today?
Very good. And you?
I'm doing fine, thanks so much. And today we're going to be discussing a very important topic, one that I'm sure parents, students, many teenagers alike have experienced in their life, or
And
perhaps know somebody,
teachers.
and
And
teachers,
teachers.
and know somebody who is experiencing this, and that is anxiety, and especially the anxiety epidemic that is happening in schools right now, and how it's affecting uh, not only, as you said, teachers, students, everyone, right? And we're going to be talking about what the causes of that perhaps are, what people speculate they could be, why are we seeing a sharp increase, or why did we see a sharp increase in the early 2010s, around 2012? Why does it continue to increase, and what can be done about it? So, really looking forward to having this conversation with you, Christian. And yeah, where do you want to begin? So, what is anxiety? In your mind, you have a neuroscience
Yeah.
and a psychology background. Could you perhaps just clarify what that is?
So anxiety is more than stress, right? Everyone has stress. Stress is actually positive. We need stress in our life. Anxiety is how you respond to constant level of stress, and that generates neurological response of not being emotionally regulated, being in the flight or fight mode. And
Mhm.
that also, so that's the neuroscience. And in the psychology, then it's generalized states of fear, right? So anxiety is more than stress, it's more fear of things around you. And then there's some symptoms. We can go through that. What would you add to this definition, and can you share more your perspective?
Well, it's first of all, it's natural. So it's a natural and physiological response to perceived threats, right? So people have described, symptoms of tension, worried thoughts, physical changes, like even increases in blood pressure or faster heart rate. So often, it is often discussed as a negative experience, but it is helpful to distinguish between, you know, two primary forms. So one, you have like the biological anxiety, the biological alarm, and that is more the body's fight or flight response. So when you face a stressful event like giving a speech or, just closely missing a car accident, your brain releases cortisol and adrenaline. And in this context, anxiety is actually a survival mechanism that's designed to help you stay alert and to react quickly to the danger. The second one, and perhaps the one that we're going to be talking a little bit about more today, is the clinical condition. So, anxiety actually becomes a clinical concern when these feelings are persistent, they're excessive, and they're irrational. So, unlike temporary stress, as we saw in the example before, which ends once the threat is gone, an anxiety disorder involves something like having anticipatory worry, feeling dread about the future or events that may not have even happened, right? A sort of disproportionate response, a level of distress that doesn't even match the actual danger of the situation, right? Or even a physical manifestation, something like symptoms of chronic fatigue, digestive issues, muscle tension, or even sleep disturbances, right?
Yeah, it affects
So,
physiologically, even your saliva production, a lot of things that can be measured. So it is psychological and also physiological. And
correct.
just to kind of add to when you talk about anxiety disorder, at awe we try, to not to always talk about the clinical, although we're clinically versed and we work with clinicians, but we also, the clinical term is general anxiety disorder. So it's like a generalized, like you said, not specific. It just continues, and it's normally 6 months or more.
Hmm.
But in terms of, and there's also other types of anxiety that we'll get into. But I think in terms of concretely, I want to give the audience kind of the image of, we're talking about schools today, right? So it's 8:30 in the morning, children or teenagers are on the hall, everyone is going to class or trying not to be late to class or ready for an exam, and 1 out of 5 of those children, youth, adolescent, 1 out of 5 of all those beautiful children have some anxiety symptoms. Isn't
Yeah.
that crazy?
Well, yeah, well, actually, it's even more than that. So, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, they did a study since 2010. There has been a documented increase in anxiety disorders, especially amongst adolescents. So, the data actually suggests that 1 in 3 adolescents, so approximately 31.9%, will experience an anxiety disorder between the ages of 13 and 18, which is the time that most people are either in high school or in middle school, right?
Yeah.
But the data is also, there's a lot of data that has been done since 2010, specifically showing that there is actually a big gender gap when talking about anxiety disorders,
Yep.
especially as related to adolescents. So, female adolescents are consistently more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety disorders than their male counterparts, sorry. And the studies indicate that approximately 38% of female adolescents experience anxiety compared to roughly 26% of males. So it's a marginal increase. That's from the Journal of American Academic Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So generally, females on average do have a higher likelihood of experiencing an anxiety disorder between the ages 13 and 18, but that does not negate the significant percentage we see in boys, which is 26%. So that's still 1 in 4, right? This is very worrying trends that we've seen over the last couple of years.
I just
Perhaps,
wanted
yeah.
to clarify that for adults too, women
Mhm.
are also more at risk of anxiety in general. There are differences in male and female brains, and they perceive threat more, and that might be good for saving children, for instance, and protecting. So they
Mhm.
might have higher alert. So there's evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology reason why women will have more anxiety. But that's also from adolescence, but also in adulthood. I don't have the stats for that, but we'll go into some papers.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I think a big question that we will discuss today is why do we see, or why have we seen this sharp increase in these anxiety disorders since the period of 2010, 2012? That's really when the data starts to show an increasing trend. And I think that a lot of the data, and we will get into this later, suggests a strong correlation between smartphone ownership, right, and anxiety disorders. So the period around 2012, which is when smartphone ownership amongst adolescents surpassed 50%, was actually a critical turning point in the culture. So, unlike previous generations who left social pressures at school, modern adolescents are subjected to a 24/7 cycle of social comparison,
Yep.
which is completely unnatural, right? And so, this sort of digital status seeking triggers the brain's reward system while simultaneously fueling anxiety about social exclusion, so FOMO, right? So, metrics like likes, views, and follower counts provide a literal score for social standing, which the paper links to increased, the paper being, I think, Myers et al., 2012, JAMA Psychiatry, that increased self-consciousness and heightened fear are, triggered as a negative evaluation here. But more importantly, I think, is that we often, we will criticize countries like China for having a social credit score system, but it is not entirely different to say that children or adolescents in schools use social media as a similar way of ranking their own social credits amongst others, and triggers
How
FOMO
many
essentially.
followers, how many likes is your
Yeah.
social credit score in some ways, and especially when you're an adolescent and you
Yeah.
have this drive as a teenager to go away, have independence from your family, and then
Mhm.
find solace in groups.
Absolutely.
And if you get social rejection, we know that it triggers some of the same receptors as pain.
Yeah.
So it's pretty critical at that age, right?
And to that point, exactly, and Jonathan Haidt has written two books on this. So one being The Anxious Generation, the other being The Coddling of the American Mind. There is a rise of safetyism and declining autonomy amongst kids and adolescents. So this is what we've seen, in the past 20 years is a shift from the childhood experience being unsupervised free play, right, to highly structured adult-led activities, right? So what a lot of these papers do suggest is that there is a sort of risk deprivation amongst kids and adolescents. And so overprotecting children from physical or emotional discomfort may actually inadvertently prevent kids from developing the emotional calluses or the emotional resilience needed to manage anxiety, right? So without the experience of navigating minor risks independently, like walking home from school alone or, taking a bus or going out and playing for a few hours, larger life transitions may feel catastrophic because you never got to experience the buildup of anti-fragility from having these smaller, minor abrasions, I would say. Right? Does that make
Well,
sense?
to have resilience, you need to go out in the world and fall and come back and get bruised and physical resilience, right? If you go to the gym, that's strength training, right? So you're
Yep.
actually hurting your body so that it becomes better, so that it responds better. Same thing for the mind, right? And this morning I was actually reading Childhood Unplug. So that's from Katrin Johnson Martinko,
Nice.
a Canadian writer. That also the preface is from the author of Free Range Kids. Free Range Kids is to help your kids not
Hmm.
stay at home locked in. And there's an interesting stat here that says that the average kid is spending less time outside than an average prison inmate. So that's how
It's
that
crazy.
that's how crazy it is. And by the way, we'll have Katrin, the author of this book, on this podcast in a week or two. So check out for that information. Looking
Hmm.
forward to have a chat with her as well. And this idea, like you said, is overprotecting our kids in the outside. Sorry, in the on the outside, saying you cannot go out. It's dangerous. There's a rapist or a kidnapper at every
Yeah.
corner or park, and then you give them access to a phone or digital world where maybe they're physically safe, but they're not ready for the digital or the real world if they're
Yeah.
stuck in these loops of comparison, comparing themselves to others, social comparison, exclusion, mockery, cyberbullying, right?
Yeah. And again, we are talking about adolescents primarily, but these forces affect adults as well. And that is not to be negated in the discussion, although we are focusing on adolescence. That is, I think, very prescient and important conversation to have because that is still a very formative period of life where the brain is still developing. But there have been studies showing that technology in general, right? And I've seen this in my clinical practice with patients a lot, with adult patients who have primarily remote jobs or work from home most of the time or just isolated, experience a lot of anxiety like symptoms, right? Because of the social contact deprivation. So technology is negatively affecting people of all ages in this regard. And I think that the conversation, especially on kids, is prescient because they have their whole lives ahead of them. And developmentally, if you raise them in a sort of bubble, right, wanting to protect them from danger, that is a virtuous intention, but it has harmful consequences. And I think parents are just catching on to that now.
Well, we know now from the stats that anyone in the U.S. and U.K. that is younger than 45, the I think the two main causes of that are suicide and overdose. So it's not someone in the street catching your kid that's really the danger. It's how they're mentally. We've talked to a school recently that was talking about self harm, suicidal ideation for the kids, and even younger than middle school, right? So those are real issues that counselors, psychologists, teachers, and schools and parents are dealing with. Some don't like to talk about it. Some want to hide it and say everything is fine. But then we see the consequences that things cannot be hush hush and fine forever if there's no proactive solution. And that's what we're trying to do at Awe Digital Wellness, trying to give schools, parents, teachers those resources so that we can prevent and not look at what happened in the future with regret, right?
Absolutely. So perhaps we can pull up the first graph that I sent to you, Alfredo. It says Teenage Wasteland, United States, 13 to 17-year-olds, so that we can just look at a little bit more of this visualized data. So pretty much there was research that, exactly this one, the Pew Research Center uh, actually did a survey with 13 to 17-year-olds where they ranked the top issues amongst their peers. And the first question, this was self-report, was how much, if at all, do you think each of the following is a problem among people your in your age in your community, right? Red being major, blue being minor. You can see anxiety and depression are the self-reported the biggest issues, right? The biggest problems consistently for kids 13 to 17-year-olds, more so than bullying, more so than drug addiction, more so than drinking, poverty, teen pregnancy, or gangs, right? Anxiety and depression being the two most prevalent issues. And if we think that this is just a social class issue, if you go to the graph on the right, which is showing each of the following is a major problem among people in their age in the community that they live, you see the socioeconomic class represented by the different colors. You still see anxiety and depression clustered together. These three social classes being less than 30K in household income, 30 to 75K household income plus 75K. So what this shows you is that regardless of your socioeconomic status, anxiety and depression are still ranked as most the major problem
By
for
far.
peers by far in that age group, right? You can see what's interesting here in the data. You see that low to medium bullying says yes, but the richer status says no. But all of them consistently rank anxiety and depression as the major problem for uh, people, peers in their age group, uh, which does say something that it is independent. It affects everyone, right? It is not selective based on socioeconomic status.
And we can imagine that different group have different types of anxiety or different stressors that create anxiety, right? Perhaps that
Sure.
the lower income have more financial anxiety, that the higher
Right.
income might have different types of pressure anxiety. But
Hmm.
it all comes down to anxiety being and depression in this case being the leading worries. Um,
Absolutely.
and this links back to what we were talking about. In actuality, people are not worried about gangs, although that is physical violence and can be really bad. That's not the real danger anymore today. Maybe
Hmm.
it is in very specific location or in the past, but today we know that anxiety and depression, mental well-being in general, is really what is happening in school. We talk to youth, we see that all the time, and we don't have the resources to address that yet, right?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times it goes underreported, and counselors, teachers, faculty perhaps don't recognize it as soon as they should when it happens in the schools. So again, a lot of this data that we see here in this graph is self-report data, right? But it would probably come as a surprise to a lot of teachers who are working closely together with these kids on a daily basis, right?
Well, I think it's easy if you have, 25 to 30 students per class. And as you said, maybe one out of three, one out of four has some type of anxiety, to kind of miss out on what Johnny or Sylvia were doing. And, you have to do a class. So you think everything's going on, but a lot of things are going, internally. And I'll get to some of my research as well that I found, but I can give you a preview that it affects
Sure.
academic performance as well, right? So it's not only that it's their mental health, which is very important, but as a teacher, if you want them to perform better, academic performance, you have to be equipped to understand the mental wellness as well.
Absolutely. Academic performance, I think it starts to get taken seriously when you start to see the consequences, which is, social isolation, academic performances, so even weight loss, right? People or weight gain as a way of coping with with the disorders, with what they're experiencing. So before we get to your studies, just some other statistics that we have here regarding academic and achievement pressure. So, surveys of high school students, and this is again according to Pew Research from 2019, surveys of high school students show that performance anxiety related to grades and college admissions has become a primary stressor. Over 70% of teens identify anxiety and depression as a major problem amongst their peers in their community. And if people are wondering, why, the start in 2010, it really did get, I would say, exasperated even more during the COVID-19. So while the upward trend began well before 2020, the pandemic accelerated those figures. The global prevalence of child and adolescent anxiety doubled during the first year of the pandemic compared to pre-pandemic estimates, and that's from JAMA Pediatrics, global prevalence of depressive anxiety symptoms in children and adolescents during COVID-19. Why do you think that is that during COVID-19, these results, the levels of anxieties reported amongst teenagers and children actually doubled?
There's a few causes I believe, and we can talk about them. I just wanted to
Hmm.
note, we talked about different sort of general anxiety disorders. There's anxiety symptoms. You talked about performance anxiety, and we're not talking about performance anxiety in the sexual way because
No.
teen pregnancy was a concern, but that's not performance anxiety is in performing at school or performing at
Correct.
something that you're doing, right? So we can imagine that the curve has gone up because of a few different factors. One, we talked about smartphones and social media, right? Second is actually more stress in terms of trying to get to the good schools, trying to stay above the curve, the FOMO, as we talked about. And
Hmm.
I think one of the other stressor is, and we'll talk about this, there's a third form of anxiety, which is specifically social anxiety, right? It can be anxiety in general, performance anxiety, or social anxiety. And I think that's also something that, we have a crisis of meaning. We also have a crisis of loneliness. The US Surgeon General says that loneliness is an epidemic. So that's also why the curve is going in a very drastic way in the wrong direction. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I always think that social, with regards to social anxiety, the fact of the matter is that when you're online, you are being confronted with tons of images of people doing things or videos, content, right? And it fools the brain into actually thinking you're interacting with people. But when you're actually put in a setting where you are tasked to approach a stranger, even a woman at a bar, right? You have all these feelings, emotions coming up, and the response to that is avoidance in most cases. Most cases, it's I don't like what I'm feeling, so I'm just going to stall, right? I actually work with a client right now who has a really strong generalized anxiety disorder. It inhibited him, prevented him from driving for many years, although he had driven before. All of a sudden, he had a huge fear of getting into a car accident. And really, the most tried and tested method to overcome an anxiety disorder is actually exposure therapy. So, little by little, what he did was that he would go and sit in a car without driving, and then get out, and then he would perhaps get in the car, put the keys in the ignition, and then take them out and go out, and then he would, incrementally get to the point where he is actually driving the car, because you have to gradually and voluntarily expose yourself to to the trigger for the anxiety. Now, he successfully overcame that anxiety, but the anxiety creeped into another area of his life, being like what he initially approached me about was that he has never he slept with a woman before, and he's 37, 38, and he has a huge fear of approaching women, and the fear comes from the idea of making a fool of himself, how embarrassing it would be, the rejection, everybody like laughing and pointing at him. And what I do with him is that we gradually work on getting him outside of the house, and to a point where he's talking to strangers. I said, don't just forget about going on a date with a woman. Just I want you to just practice talking to people and asking people for directions, asking people for any recommendations on restaurants in the area, small things like this, right? Smiling, giving compliments, all that stuff, right? But it has to be done gradually, and not, you can't push somebody into the deep end of the pool. They have to go voluntarily, step by step, into it.
Thanks
So,
for the specific
yeah,
example. And by the way, for the audience, Mark and I are not dating coaches, but we know
no,
that that it's definitely
there are
something that,
tons of them. There are
yeah,
tons of them out there, right?
but we're not there to do that. But that's part of life. We need to date. We need to procreate. We need to have sex. And some people are, we're having less sex than ever. In the last few years,
Right.
people having sex, people who've not had sex, like you said, virgin for many years, but also average person that's having sex at least once a year is so low compared to before. We have these incel movements, right? And that's affecting the youth now, right? They're watching this content.
Yes.
They have this irrealistic expectation, right? My son's ex-girlfriend, for instance, my son's a teenager, and his ex-girlfriend was expecting him to act like a man, and he's like 15 at the time, and wanted him to have money, like the videos she sees on social media.
At
So
15.
I'm 15. I don't have a job. I'm not a man.
At,
What?
at 15.
Yeah.
That's insane.
So
Wow.
and that's the type of anxiety that we talked about girls, but boys also have this anxiety, right? So you have to
Yeah,
perform to an unrealistic version of who you can be as a teenage boy, right?
correct. And you did mention performance anxiety before. I don't have the data on this, but I know there is a strong increase in the number of prescribed erectile dysfunction medication
Yeah.
for men in their 20s, not for
Mm-hmm.
older men,
Yeah.
but for men in their 20s who or early 30s who are experiencing performance anxiety, and performance anxiety being that they are not able to get an erection before having
And it's
sex. Not
and it's not a physical cause. It is mental,
No,
right?
no, it's not. Yeah, exactly. It's not because and I've spoken to many men who have experienced it. It's not because they don't want to have sex. They do. They really do. It's that there are thoughts about not being able to perform that get in the way and that are inhibiting, that are causing this physiological reaction. We talked about physiological reaction to anxiety before,
Yeah.
and very much is big. And so perhaps I had a client a few months ago. He got pretty drunk once and was with his girlfriend and was not able to get an erection, and they blamed it on the alcohol. But the next time that he was sober and tried to make it happen, he was so worried thinking about that past experience, right? The entire time that he wasn't present with his girlfriend, he was just worried and thinking about himself, that it caused him to actually have a similar reaction and not be able to get an erection, and also have this performance anxiety. So it's very much again a physiological reaction, and but it's with entirely psychological causes, entirely.
Thanks for those real examples. And we know that teenagers, like it or not, parents are having sex around the teenage years. So we cannot pretend that's not happening. That might be some extra cause of worry in a teenage night, right? When is it going to be my first time? With who? Are my friends doing it? Am I not doing it? Right? There's this interesting British series. I think it's on Netflix, called
Skins.
Sex
Oh,
Education.
sex education. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
That's a
yeah.
good one.
That talks about teenagers and those years, which is a lot of anxiety. Of course, sexuality is part of their
Yeah.
identity to become, right?
But you did also say that Gen Z is having less sex than perhaps than their um, millennials did at their age. That there is
Yes.
just a, I think there's data again. Sorry, audience and viewers, but we I don't have the data on this, but I've heard hearsay that Gen Z is actually having less sex than any other generation before, and a lot of that is perhaps, even though we see so much media being sexualized, right? A lot of sexual images going out. There is actually the opposite is actually happening, which is that people Gen Z is a little more awkward talking to each other, interacting with each other in person, which is coincidentally causing levels of sex to go down amongst their generation
And
and
we're not
levels of
talking about
anxiety.
whatever type of sex or promiscuity or not. It's just, sex is part of the human being, and adolescence actually means you're becoming a sexual being, right? So your hormone, your puberty means that you're becoming a sexual being,
Yeah.
and to navigate that, while in a context where people are having less sex, maybe more one night stand type of relationship, using
Mhm.
dating apps, um, or dating coaches, depending,
Yeah.
but trying to get those quick wins and not building bonds, right? And we know that sex and intimacy is part of prevention for anxiety, actually, right?
Yeah.
So they produce oxytocin, a safe environment, and safety is the opposite of fear, right?
Mm. So I do want to come back for a second to some of the causes that we talked. I think the primary one being the smartphone, the access to the smartphone at such an early age. We see a lot of parents out there getting their kids smartphones at 12, 13 years of age. And I even in I had the chance of speaking with some parents in Connecticut and New York last week, and they were telling me, yeah, no, we got our kid a phone when he turned 13. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes you can make if you have a child. And one of the biggest mistakes is to get your child a phone thinking that they're just going to use it to communicate with you. They're not. They're going to be getting unmitigated access to the internet. And if anything, you really should wait until the child turns 16, 17, even 18. And if you're not willing to wait that long, there's a lot of alternatives. You can get them a Nokia, a dumb phone. Even at all, we sell a phone that is medically approved for the treatment of phone addiction. This phone is designed to be the first phone that a child gets that helps them transition to getting a real phone. And the way that it does it is using operant conditioning to train kids to reevaluate their behavior, their impulses, so they're not spending hours on TikTok. If you want to check out what the smarter phone is, this is what it looks like right here. And you can find it on our website and find more information there.
And I
Christian,
guess to
what?
bring it back to kind of what we talked about, the virginity, right? If you're a parent, you want your child's first sexual experience to be safe and a good one. Well, if
Mhm.
you're a parent, you want their first phone to be safe and a good one, and that's what we tried to build at all with the All Smarter phone.
Correct. Yeah. For more information on the All Smartphone, you feel free to check out our website, alldigitalwellness.com. You'll find a link to the smartphone on there.
In
Christian,
the
what are your
product page of
product
that
page?
website, yeah.
Correct.
So I
What
have
are your Mhm. Go
go
on.
ahead. Do you have more studies just to
I
see if we?
I do have some more slides. Perhaps Alfredo, you can show the next one, which has figure two at the bottom. Yeah, okay. So not entirely anxiety, but related. So this is just a figure showing the number of the percentage of girls, young adult women, teenage boys, and young adult men in the last 12 months uh, having major depressive episode that includes anxiety oftentimes. So you can see from 2005 to 2017, we do see an increase amongst all groups. The group that we see the sharpest increase, however, is teenage girls, and that happens in 2011. Do you see that sharp increase there, Christian,
Yeah.
in the pink line? And this is exactly what Height and colleagues were talking about happened with the introduction of the smartphone, of the like button on social media. So disproportionately, teen girls are affected with regards to their anxiety and major depressive episodes by the smartphone and by social media. And this is just really a remarkable statistic and graph here showing that this group really is the most affected one of all the four groups. Teenage young adult women, you can see 2016 starting to have a sharper increase in the percentage of women in that group with reported major depressive episode in the last 12 months. Uh, Men and boys on average have a much slower increase. So, what do you think about that data, Christian?
I think I saw that in the youngsters generation as one of the graph. So
Yep.
I was aware of it. And I would say that this is in 2017. So that was before TikTok. So I'm sure it's probably worse now.
Well, let's Alfredo, if you have the next figure, figure three exactly. This is serious psychological distress, including anxiety, uh, reported by age group from 2008 to 2017. Yes, it only goes until 2017. We can only imagine with TikTok, it's gotten much worse. But you see in the group 18 to 25 is most affected by the
By far,
introduction of the smart. Exactly,
by
exactly.
far. Yeah.
By far. You see a sharp increase happening in the year 2013, going up dramatically. So I can only imagine. I would be really interested to see the most recent data from the last 7 years on this, but I can only imagine it's gone up
Yeah.
even
Agreed.
more. Percentage in the
And
past month, right
we
there.
see it, we hear it. School counselors, teachers,
Oh yeah,
are they don't know what to do anymore, right? So
they
that
are feeling powerless. Yeah.
yeah, and that's why we believe at Odd that partnering with schools and giving them the tools, the technological tools like the smartphone, but also our software portals for schools, as well as our human counselors and workshops, can help shift that curve eventually, because
100%.
it is a major concern for everyone involved, for the next generation, for those who are parents, for those who are teachers, and even those who are not, that really cares about our upcoming youth that are facing so many challenges in school and out of school, and having one counselor for 500 or 700 students is not going to cut it, right? If 1 out of 3 have anxiety, and there's 900 students, that's right, and that's just one of the many issues that we can prevent. So
On
yeah.
top of that, one counselor for 500 students, that is just an unrealistic number of students that one counselor has to manage. But these counselors often, this is a very new phenomenon. Like we're talking about things that just came about in the last 10, 15 years. And a lot of these counselors, psychologists went to school, and in the schools, they're teaching principles, psychological therapeutic methods that often are outdated or perhaps just not equipped to deal with the modern issue regarding
I
social
mean,
media addiction,
we can say
anxiety.
outdated. I mean, I've seen some curriculum in schools that are,
Mm,
like 10 years old, and they,
yeah,
people haven't updated the new science. They don't have
correct.
the knowledge to help, and that's okay. But there's also some actions to be doing, right? It's not just, oh, we don't have the right information. It's how can we proactively get it to the
Hmm.
staff and teachers and counselors, trickle down to the children, and have a proactive approach. Also include the parents, right? So all of them, everyone is part of the
Absolutely.
equation.
Yeah. So I showed all my data. I showed the graphs. Christian, do you have also some data that you'd like to share as well, right?
Is it you show me yours, I'll show you mine type of thing?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We're talking about data. We're talking about data here. It's data.
so here's my research. Here's my research. Go ahead, Alfredo. The role
Oh,
of
yeah.
peers in the development of society, the development of social anxiety in adolescent girls, a systematic review that is 2019, so a little bit more recent. So again, we talked about anxiety, general anxiety disorder, performing anxiety, and now social anxiety. So social anxiety, this study looks at, sex differences, so adolescent girls and also boys. So we see that boys and girls have some similar issues, right? So it boys and girls will have low peer acceptance as associated with social anxiety, right? So if your friends don't like you, basically, you're gonna have social anxiety as a boy or as a girl. But girls have also different associations. One is the limited close friendships. One is negative friendship or negative friendship experience. And the last one is relational victimization, right? So those are risk factors for young girls. They have the same as boy. If your friends don't like you, it's not good. But also, if you have limited close friendships, if you have friends that have had negative experience, negative friends could be bullying or could be other forms of negative friendships or victimization. And that's interesting for research and for what we do at Oz evidence based. So we try to get the latest research and create curriculums that address those real issues, variation of sexes, variation of age, right? So sometimes you have clinical or non-clinical wellness provider that will give you a blanket approach. We believe that the more personalization, the more understanding of what the context and what are the variables, the factors that might affect, will help prevent. And it starts by awareness, as O stands for awareness, wellness, and enjoyment. Let's go to the second slide, which is still the same study. So this talks about that during adolescence, there is an increased risk of later anxiety disorder. If you have anxiety, you mentioned 36 or 37% will have anxiety during those years.
Hmm.
But if you do, then that increased risk of having later anxiety disorders. And
Hmm.
also, we talked about educational underachievement. Right? So, anxiety now, anxiety later, and grades poorer. That's basically the finding. And if we look at the gender differences, again, adolescents and adult women are more effective. Here, we see 2009 in the UK, it was about 4-6%. So when we say that now it's 20, 25, 33 in 2026, 10, 15 years ago, it was 4 or 5%, right? So again, it is really,
Yeah.
really a concern, and schools, parents, society is not equipped to deal with that. Next slide, which is again the same study, defines social anxiety disorder as fear associated with social situations where there's a chance of scrutiny or being negatively evaluated by others, right? So you're going to do public speaking, you're going to do poetry on stage, you're going to play music, um, you're going to be on display in some way, or it can be in a smaller circle, and you're going to be publicly judged. Now, interestingly, what we talked about, Mark, is that every day, every children is on display on the internet 24/7 being judged,
Right.
right? So the last part of this slide again says that gender differences indicate that women consistently show higher rates of anxiety,
Yeah.
and that's adolescent and adults as well. So the last slide here talks about solutions, right? What can we do, Mark? What can we do, society? We need a systemic level raising of awareness. We just talked about this, of those risks and protective factors in schools, right? So prevention in school is what this paper is talking about. That is aligned with what we do at AW. We're here to prevent, and also if it's past the point of prevention, we can also help. But our main mission is to prevent, so to lower those curves, not only to address them. And it talks about pre and early adolescence is a particular time for the development of social anxiety. Does that make sense to you?
That makes a
And
lot
it
of sense.
says it's really essential that school staff have these ability, that they're able to recognize all this. So that's what we're trying to help the staff so that they can trickle down to the student as well.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Corroborates a lot of the data that I had presented before as well.
I do have another study that is called simply Anxiety in Adolescence, Can We Prevent It? That is from Yerorka et al. It is from Valencia, Spain. 3 years longitudinal studies looking at 111 boys and 140 girls in Spain. And the results were that girls experience more anxiety, as we know, also gladly more empathy. And the boys also have their own issues. They have more emotional instability and aggression, right? Violence
Hmm.
and emotional instability, fits, anger. So to continue on this study, there was some additional findings that says that the best predictor of anxiety are anger states, aggressive behavior, too much empathic concern for others, and lack of coping mechanism, right? So in all, we have our 6 pillars, and this, we deal with all those things: anger management, behavioral or aggression behavioral management, and regulation, emotional regulation, so coping mechanism, attention and focus. So those are all the pillars that we built to prevent, to have indicators, and to help educators with those real problems that are happening. And the last part, again, this study also reinforced that it affects and influences negatively academic performance, which is one of
Hmm.
our 6 pillars. There's a last study I have for you, Mark, which is emotional competence and anxiety in childhood and
Hmm.
adolescence. That's from 2016, and it's a meta-analysis. And this one mentions that anxious youths are less effective at expressing, understanding emotions, and less aware or accepting of their own emotion. And in all, we have a few frameworks, including the 4 A's, which is awareness, acceptance, appreciation, and awe. And here we talk about awareness and accepting that are causing anxiety. So at all, we're going to teach you how to be aware, how to accept, and your anxiety will not fade, will come back again, but it won't be generalized, hopefully. And you'll have better tools. You'll be equipped, which are the coping mechanism that we talked about, that many children and educators didn't have the chance to have. I think that's it. Is there other slides? Yeah, I think that's it.
So, what are some what can we do? What can teenagers do? And we talked about a lot about the causes, I think taking the smartphone away is not as easy as perhaps said. So, what are some other things that parents, teachers, students, yeah, can do
Well,
to
I think the idea is to have these conversations, is
for
to,
sure.
you know, talk to not only your school but get best practice from other schools, understand, and that's what we're doing at all, right? So we're talking to many schools in many countries, many states, many provinces, figuring out what's happening with youth, what's happening with students, what's happening with teachers, counselors, psychologists, and having a broader, right, approach. It's not just, hey, have this solution, have this pill, have this one-time meditation, have those 2 workshops, and we solve the anxiety crisis. No, it's not. Awe is not going to solve the anxiety crisis, but it's going to help in many ways. And anxiety is just one of them, right? We talked about digital balance. We talked
Hmm.
about, they're linked together. We see a study that says some people will tell you, okay, we're going to solve anxiety, but they didn't realize that that's linked to emotional regulation. We just saw this in the science, right? So all of these, that's why we have 6 pillars that actually get the whole picture. And slowly we can have these conversation and long-term relationship with staff, with schools, to make sure that those numbers are getting down in their schools and then
Right.
countrywide. Uh, is it something that you think people will accept, or what have you seen in the schools you talked to?
I think the awareness is good. I think it's good that people are having conversations. What I've noticed, however, in my own experience, is that conversations only take you so far. People conceptually understanding what anxiety is does not equate to actually dealing with it in real time. I think if you are going to address it, you have to do it systematically, similar to what I described before with my client who had the fear of driving car or approaching a woman, is that you have to guide people to gradually expose themselves to that which they are most afraid of in order to inoculate the fear response, to really show your nervous system that this is not something to be perceived as a threat, right? Because again, reading about it, watching videos about it, listening to this podcast about it is good conceptually, but less practically.
I agree. I have another stat for you in case
Sure.
people are wondering. 80% of people with anxiety disorder actually never received the treatment.
Hmm.
So we talk about who has it, but they're not being treated. So, that's why at all we invented this platform that supports 24/7 with non-medical support and prevention. Because if you wait for the doctors and the treatment, 80% are not getting treated, right?
Yeah.
Those are not people with symptoms. They actually have a diagnosed disorder and they're not receiving any treatment. And another thing, another stat, 78% of teachers have recently said that they're considering quitting.
Hmm. I wonder what
So,
that's related to.
wow.
A number of
So
things.
the students are not getting the help they need. The teachers are burnt out, wanting to leave. So there is mental health for the students we talked about, but also for the staff, right?
Right.
And what do you think that teachers might be feeling or experiencing in these last 2 years as we see those numbers, as we hear those stories?
Yeah, I mean, from the conversations I've had, they just aren't equipped. They feel kind of powerless to deal with it. They don't know how. They weren't trained. They were trained to be teachers, not to be mental health practitioners.
Hmm.
And it's similar to how cops are a little bit under equipped when dealing with a homeless person, right? Because actually it should be a psychiatrist, psychologist, a social worker who's
Yeah.
responding to a homeless person having a psychotic outbreak. The cops don't know how to deal with it. They weren't trained to do that, even though that's the first person you call when you see a homeless person screaming and throwing something about in public. Similarly, yet teachers just weren't trained necessarily to address this. So
Lack
I
of
look
training, lack of support. Agreed.
exactly.
And it's like if you're a teacher and watching this, there's at least one thing that we can share that might be helpful. You might not be equipped, and we encourage you to to talk to us. We have lots of resource for teachers, but if you don't have the time or the will, just listen to this advice. Sometimes it's really easy to not see that kid that has anxiety in the classroom or that has other issues, right? But from our experience, something as easy, there's the this person, we will call her Maya because confidentiality, but Maya actually was having quite of internal issues, and for weeks she was really struggling until a teacher kind of noticed. And instead of saying, go to your counselor or go to your parents, it is not my problem. I wasn't trained as a psychologist, and I have 29 other students.
Mhm.
The teacher was just present, listened, and later Maya was able to say, I felt better, and it all started by being seen, right? I felt that I
Yeah.
was seen, right? So even if that person is loud or quiet, you never know what's going on internally. You never know. the anxiety, the stress, the other factors, the social anxiety we talked about. So
Correct.
just be a bit more present, listen.
Mhm.
Um, this is my advice for any teacher out there.
Very good advice, and it can be applied to parents as well and to peers, right? Just being present, being available, and willing to listen. Very good. Perhaps we can open up the floor and see if anybody watching has questions. And if you are watching live on any platform, including LinkedIn, YouTube, any platform, please help chime into the conversation. If you've experienced anxiety yourself or know somebody who has, and have any advice around that or any questions regarding that, please drop your questions into the chat right now.
Thanks so much. We also can talk about some specific population. We talked about economic class, but there's also cultural class. There's also sexual preference. We know that the LGBTQ population, for instance, have more anxiety because we talked about social, not only social anxiety but social and peer. If they're not accepted by their family or community or fear of acceptance, they might develop more anxiety. So we also know, and we create our platforms and our solutions based on whatever situation, population that we're dealing with, to make sure that it's not just a generic approach. Again, it's really tailored to who we're talking to in the school or who we're talking to at an individual level. And is it a boy or a girl, as we're talking today, makes a difference. And not enough people are really looking at it as a more personalized approach. That's what we're trying to do better, and that's why we also have these discussions with live Q&A, and we always brainstorm around how can we learn more, how can we share with our guests. We'll have a guest next week on a different topic. But really enjoyed this topic because it's so important. We saw the stats today, Mark. Thanks for
Yeah.
the nice graphs. And we dealt with anxiety symptoms, general anxiety disorder, performance anxiety, social anxiety. Any other things you want to bring up to the conversation, Mark?
Yeah, I did read a book on anxiety, I think by Judson. Yeah, called it's by Judson Brewer, called Unwinding Anxiety. And actually, Dr. Brewer is a psychiatrist, and I don't have a link to that here for us in the chat, but you can look it up on Google, Unwinding Anxiety by Judson Brewer. And I read it over a year ago, and from what I remember, what he uses to actually address anxiety is what is known as meta meditation. So in the realm of Buddhist mindfulness meditation, you have different types of meditation, and one of them is awareness based mindfulness meditation, where you sit and you notice the sensation of the breath on your nostrils, your lips, the feeling of air on your skin. What metta meditation is, and I encourage anyone watching to try this out, is actually to imagine somebody that you appreciate, somebody that you love, and extending that love to them in your life. And then, if you want to go a step further, try to imagine from their perspective them extending love to you, right? Love and respect. This could be a close friend, a partner, parents, somebody very close to you in your life, and just imagining, letting that love go, and gifting it to them, right? And wanting them to be happy, wishing them well, wanting them to be happy, wanting. You can even do it with like a little a pet dog that you have, a pet, right? Wishing wellness upon this being, right? In the meditation is one of the most effective methods at relieving anxiety disorders, interestingly enough. And it's also, I saw this on Dr. K's YouTube channel. That form of meditation, metta, is also very effective at addressing ADHD, funnily enough. So by actually focusing on wishing someone that you love or who's close to you well, right? Wishing them happiness, relief from suffering, you actually improve your own mental health outcomes.
Thanks so much for sharing. Yes, we had a few podcasts on ADHD, including our wonderful guest Andre
Hmm.
recently. And metta is not the word metta in English. It's metta, the Sanskrit word, and it's one of the keys for four keys of Buddhism. I forget if it's the loving kindness or compassion word, but
Yes.
I'm also familiar with that. And guess what, Mark? We do digital resets that help people experience those states.
Of
Um,
meta.
I did one for parents this week, actually. So try our
Nice.
digital resets at the link right here. And also, this links to next week. We're having a guest, Dr. Manish,
Hmm.
who will talk about his um, types of meditation. He did a meditation for our internal team. We had about a dozen employees at experience a group meditation earlier this week. And we will have Dr. Manish in our podcast, I believe, May 8th,
Right.
Friday, May 8th. It should be the next podcast. And meditation or mindfulness or transcending mindfulness, self compassion meditation, self compassion, metta meditation, awe
Hmm.
meditation, oneness meditation. All of these are what we do. And we do also meditation specifically for school teachers, for
Yes.
parents, for youth. So, there's a lot of meditation out there, but we have something very specific for every person that we cater to. And, different variety, different length. Some are 5 minutes, some are 25 minutes, some are 10, depending on the time that you have on the day. But
Hmm.
thank you, all the listeners, for spending 1 hour with us on this Friday. We really appreciate. We encourage you to check out our websites, by the way. Again, awedigitalwellness.com and
Hmm.
awewellness.org. So both websites are active. Contact us with any of them. And we're willing to have more conversation next week. I really enjoyed this. I'm less anxious now. Mark, thank you.
Likewise.
So, any closing words? And thanks again, Mark.
Thank you, Christian. And yes, if anyone who's watching this or knows or is experiencing themselves a form of anxiety, please feel free to reach out to one of us or visit alldigitalwellness.com. That's alldigitalwellness.com, allwellness.org, both of those websites to get in touch with somebody from our team. Thank you so much, Christian.
And if you care about health in school, if you're in school, if you're running a school, if your kids are in school, and you want us to talk to your schools or districts or county, please let us know. We're here to spread the word and help students, staff, and parents. So thanks once again. Have a beautiful weekend.
Bye bye.